Good morning. You're listening to Retake Our Democracy, a 30-minute weekly show that airs every Saturday morning at 8:30 a.m. on KSFR 101.1 FM, your Santa Fe public radio station. And I'm Paul Gibson, the host of Retake Our Democracy, and
I'm Roxanne Barber. I am the co-founder, along with Paul, of Retake Our Democracy.
today, Roxanne and I will be talking about the Roundhouse session just completed. We're going to talk about some of the big wins, some of the disappointments, and some of the lessons learned. Last week, I spoke with the legendary Sally Rogers. She's the founder of the Conservation Voters of New Mexico and a lifelong and very powerful advocate for the planet and the people with a lot of experience at the Roundhouse. If you're driving around today and don't catch all of today's show, you can watch today's show and all of our past shows by going to retakeourdemocracy.org and hovering over the actions and events page and clicking on Retake Conversations.
So not only do you get to hear it, but there's video as well.
Yeah. Before we get started, I wanted to acknowledge that we are conducting this interview or this show on stolen Tewa land. And we just want to thank our Tewa neighbors for being such good stewards of the land and acknowledge that we really need to learn from that stewardship if we're going to save this planet. So thank you. And we're very grateful to the Tewa people.
Thank you.
Finally, Retake Our Democracy is launching a 501c3. That's a nonprofit organization, so your donations would be tax deductible. And the name is going to be Rethink Our Democracy. And we now have a new menu tab on the homepage. If you go to the homepage at retakeourdemocracy.org, just look for Rethink in the menu bar and you click on that, and there's a summary of what we're proposing and some other things, and we'll be adding to that as we move forward.
And just to be clear, Retake Our Democracy is a nonprofit organization, but we are a 501c4, which is a little bit different.
Yeah, your deductions are not tax deductible.
So we're going to add a 501c3 into the work that we do.
And we've had conversations with an attorney who specializes in this, and he actually says that 95% of what we do already would fall under a 501c3. So most of our activity, even the alerts that we do for the legislature, are 501c3 stuff. The only stuff that really isn't, and he sort of thinks it could be 501c3, is our election stuff.
Right. And just to let people know, the reason we're doing this is because then we can receive foundation funding, and then all of the donations that we receive will be tax deductible. And right now they are not under the 501c4.
Right. And what we want to do is that we want to hire staff to make us more efficient during the Roundhouse session, be able to do more, produce this show, and a lot of other things. But it's not just about lessening the burden on Roxanne and I. It's also about creating a staff structure that can sustain the work after Roxanne and I ride off into the sunset.
After we get too old.
Yeah, too old. We may be getting there too.
Some days it feels like it, for sure.
So today the full show is going to focus on the legislative session, and
we'll try to make it interesting.
Well, yeah, we'll try and make it engaging.
Yeah.
And so the first thing we would just want to acknowledge is that we're always focused on what we didn't get done, and that will be a big part of the report card that we're working on. But we do need to note that of the 21 transformational bills that we were supporting, 10 of them passed and were signed.
So that's almost half. And
that's almost half.
In the 2019 session, only about a third of
Correct.
the bills, and we call them, transformational is our term. We have a process of vetting and going through bills and selecting what we're going to support. And there's always a lot more great legislation than we have time to support. So, but anyway, half of those that we considered transformational did pass this year. So that's the good news.
And then it's not as good a picture with priority bills. With the priority bills, and we had 23 of those.
That's a second tier list of bills.
Second tier, good bills, all of them. I mean, community solar's over there, some HB4, the Civil Rights Act. I mean, these are not, small potatoes.
These are not slouchy bills.
No slouch. But there we only got 7 of the 23 bills we were supporting. And part of what we're going to talk about today is some of the patterns we saw in what passed and what didn't pass. And also talk a bit about,
He's clipping papers.
Paper.
And I'm elbowing him to tell him to stop making noise.
Stop making noise. And so we're going to talk now a bit about, some of the patterns we've identified and some of the things that were our big wins and big disappointments. And so we're going to start on the pod. Well, but even before we get to that, we want to acknowledge that one bill, HB 124 SB 75, is a state agency sensitive information bill that passed. And inexplicably, we're recording this on Friday at about 12:30, almost 1. And it appears that the governor has not signed that.
Well, and we
every
don't,
one of our bills that passed, she signed.
yeah, but we don't know that for sure because it's not posted on the governor's website. They haven't put out a press release. So it's possible that she did sign that before noon today. And noon today was the deadline.
Correct.
For all of those bills, except for one,
Right.
which was the marijuana bill, the cannabis bill that was just passed in the special session. But we'll talk about that. That
Yeah.
has a little more time.
Yeah, she has
her
another
to
couple
sign.
weeks to sign that. But let's talk about the big wins.
Okay. Well, there are 6 bills that have been introduced. Well, many more, but these are the bills from our list, just to clarify that. In the past, some over multiple years, and that never passed. So this year, of course, the abortion ban repeal passed. Thank goodness. It's about time.
Permanent fund
permanent
for
fund
early
for-
childhood.
Yes. The Health Security Act. Now, technically, this is funding for the Health Security Act to do some more planning and design work, right?
Right,
So we're
right,
not going to
right.
have health security for New Mexicans for another, I don't know,
In
what,
2 years, they will come back and with a full plan. And that's when the rubber hits the road.
Yeah.
They pass that, then it's off to the races. They form a commission and
Yeah.
they would start implementing.
but this was a
healthcare.
big step
Oh,
this year.
yes.
Finally, after
Huge.
30 years of health security for New Mexicans.
Yep.
And Mary Feldblum, who's head of that, working on that. So congratulations to them and to Mary and to all of us. End of life options, Elizabeth Whitefield, end of life options passed, which I think a lot of people are thrilled about, that there is that option now for terminally ill people who are suffering. The cannabis bill, after much much work and much back and forth, passed, although as we said, it hasn't been signed. That passed in the
All
special
180 pages of it.
that passed in special session. So, but we have no doubt that the governor is going to sign it because that's why she called the special session.
Right. That would
to
be a
get that-
surprise.
to get that bill signed. Roxy's law, that's my law, right?
Yes.
No, I'm kidding. That's the trapping law. It's actually called wildlife
Preservation.
preservation and
something like that.
public safety. That was a big win. And paid sick leave, that was HB 20
Right. And
I
that one
mean-
hasn't been introduced before. At least I don't know that it had.
in some form.
But it
maybe.
was still, of those bills, of our transformational bills, we wanted to include that as one of our biggest wins.
So
'cause
now
that's
all-
just really important to so many New Mexicans who
all
are vulnerable.
workers
Yeah.
will get
yeah.
mandatory paid sick leave. Okay, so those were the biggest wins. So you want to talk about the biggest disappointments? No, you don't want to talk about
I
it?
do. We got to face the facts, folks. For me, The biggest single disappointment was that the public bank didn't even really get a full hearing. They got swindled by a deeply flawed financial impact report that misled legislators considerably. I'm not sure it was going to get there anyway, but it would have been nice to at least to have been able to get it to the House floor and a debate and a vote.
Right. And just for people who may not know, financial impact reports are created on most of the legislation that's introduced by the Financial Legislative Services.
Legislative Services
Right.
Council and sometimes the Finance
to help
Committee.
legislators understand the financial impact of legislation. But sometimes, and this was one of those times, the report was flawed and it just had false information in it. And, you know, that was part of the demise of that bill. But, you know, relatively speaking, public banking is a new idea in New Mexico. And, you know, we've seen plenty of other cases bills that we could talk about where it just took some time for people to understand.
Like 6 of the bills we just spoke of.
Yeah. For the legislators to understand what it really means, why it's good for our state, what are all the issues, and just, it takes some years. So we're pretty confident that, you know, in another couple of years, maybe, it's going to take a big public education campaign, I think, to help everybody understand why a public bank would be so beneficial in our state.
Even more than the public, it's going to take interim hearings where it's really discussed with legislators and an expansion of constituent conversations with legislators to really focus on the public bank.
And to dispel some misinformation that a lot of legislators have latched onto. I think they just don't understand it well enough. And then they hear something negative and they get scared and they go, oh no, we can't do that.
Right.
You know?
And I'm working with Fred Nathan and Christina over at Think New Mexico on a variety of strategies and assembly of information that we didn't have at our fingertips when people were told that, you know, you wouldn't be able to get a loan from a credit union, for instance, and that there were vast swathes of land.
But you're switching bills. We were talking about public bank.
Oh, oops. Transition time.
Yes, and we were also working with our allies at AFLEP, that's the public banking advocacy group, to support them, and they are working really hard to educate legislators and educate everybody. But that was also the case with the predatory lending bill, trying to get that loan percentage rate down from 175%. Every time I think about that, I can't even believe that's where it's at, down to 36%. I mean, that's even high.
Right.
So yeah, that's when your reference to Think New Mexico.
That's what working with Think New Mexico and you know, legislators heard and were scared by testimony from the lending industry saying that the credit unions can't do these loans and that they're not located in the communities where people need the loans. Well, post-session, we realized that we haven't mapped it yet, but we're going to be mapping all of the credit unions and how many loans they gave across the state, and a preliminary examination of 112 branches that are in the state. It looks like, you know, you're within 25 to 50 miles of a credit union.
And so much of that can be done online these days, assuming you have good, you know, decent internet access.
So bottom line, I'm more confident that we'll be able to push a predatory lending bill through the legislature in 2 years, maybe even next year.
An anti-predatory lending.
Right.
The argument.
Well, I just wanted to say that I think the public bank has a tougher road going forward.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So that was a big disappointment. And I know we're going to talk about some of the environmental bills that didn't pass. Most of them didn't pass. But I just wanted to say, I want to add one that I was disappointed in that really didn't get very far, which was paid legislature.
Yeah.
And because if we can pay we are the last state in the country that doesn't pay its legislature. Yes, they get a per diem to cover whatever travel and meals and that kind of thing, but that's not really paying the legislature. If we can pay them, then we get a legislature that reflects the people of New Mexico, all the people, not just those who can afford to be a legislator, like people who are in real estate or banking, who are independently wealthy and can take the time off and work without pay. Most New Mexicans can't do that.
Right.
So that's part of it. And then if we have a paid legislature, then they'd have paid staff, and then they'd have people, vetting the bills and advising them about, what are the real issues with these bills. But as it stands, there's just no time, and they wind up relying on lobbyists for all the information. So that was a disappointment. That would have to go to the voters, and apparently this did get passed in the legislature some years ago, and the voters rejected it. So that will require a big public education campaign to get through.
And before we talk about the environmental bills, because that's a big deal, and actually the biggest disappointment probably for me is cumulatively what happened with the environmental bills. But before we do that, I want to remind our listeners that it is in times like these that KSFR is more important than ever, offering all kinds of great programming, whether it's music, commentary on arts and culture, politics, and the news. It's such a good set of programming that kind of can keep you company while you're holed up in quarantine. Thankfully, it looks like we're starting to emerge from quarantine. So for those of you who can afford it, please consider making a contribution and just thinking of it as your ticket for admission to some really great programming and great people over there at KSFR. So just go to ksfr.org and look for that donate button on the homepage and give them 10 or 20 bucks
or more
or 1,000, whatever. Give them your $1,400 relief check. That'd make them happy. And today, Roxanne and I are breaking down the just completed Roundhouse session. And we've been talking about some of our biggest wins and biggest disappointments. And we were just starting to talk about the disappointment of the energy and environmental bills. And, it's just sort of staggering. Among our transformational bills, we had 6 that were related to energy and the environment. And only one of them passed. And that is a stretch to call it an environmental bill. It's the SB 112 is the Diversify the Economy Task Force, or Economic Diversity, Sustainable Economy Task Force. And, that's a bill more about our economy and diversifying away from, so that we're not solely reliant on gas and oil, but it's not really curbing them at all. And
but it's an important bill.
Oh, it's an important bill, but
better than nothing.
When you take a look at the, the Environmental Review Act, otherwise known as the Green Amendment, and the SB 83 Local Choice Energy, that was a direct threat to the utilities and to the gas and oil industry. SB 82, the Radioactive Waste Task Force, never got through. SB 86, that's the amendment to the Produced Water Act, that died very quickly. And SB 155, the Energy Transition Act changes, also died very, very quickly. And so when you look at that, it's not exactly a great showing.
Well, and people are probably thinking, well, hey, what about community solar, SB 84? That was on our second tier list, and that did pass, but it's a shadow of its former self.
Yes. You couldn't wait to say that.
So yeah, better than nothing. I mean, I hope it's better than nothing. I mean, a lot of the environmental groups that were promoting it seem to feel pretty good about it. But I think some were also saying, well, next time around we can fix it.
We can fix it. Yeah,
Although
exactly.
that didn't work so well with the ETA this time.
Exactly. And believe me, the P&M et al. Are going to be having their knives sharpened when we try and improve that bill. But the other thing I'd like
That
to
was
point,
just a metaphor.
metaphor.
Yeah.
Um, the uh, um, the other bills that did pass, that among our priority bills, there were 4 environmental bills that passed and 6 that didn't. And we just talked about Community Solar Act, which got pretty well gutted by the utility industry amendments. But then the other ones, a healthy soil tax refund is a $1 tax refund. I mean, you can just ask to have some money given to the Healthy Soils program.
Which is
You're
good.
good, but it's no threat to
It
gas and
doesn't
oil.
really help the climate crisis.
An environmental database, HB 51, is, we're assembling information about how badly we're doing, but it's not really doing anything about it. And the sustainable building tax credit, that's a nice thing. None of these things are bad bills, but it certainly doesn't challenge any industry and doesn't challenge the gas and oil industry or the utility industry. But the 6 that failed, SB 296, increase penalties for environmental violations. No. SB 149, prohibit new fracking leases. No. SB 132, photovoltaic systems in new homes. No. SB 58, electric vehicle tax credit. No. And a really important one, HB 50, private right of action, which would have made it possible for individuals to sue people who infringe upon their environment or their climate, their personal situation. And HB 9, which was a Climate Solutions Act that Brian Egoff crowed about being, the best in the nation in terms of environmental bills, that went nowhere despite it being the speaker's bill. So when you take into consideration all of that, we really got hammered when it came down to environmental bills.
Yeah, well, it's clear that New Mexico leadership, even the Democratic Party, is not ready to make these changes. They rely too much on those industries for their election funds, but they're also worried about the amount of money that goes into our state budget. But we can't wait for that to disappear, and we need to do something about it.
Got to do something about it. So what did we learn, Roxanne?
Lessons learned. We're always looking at the lessons learned. Okay. I think one of the things we realize, and this is not new to us, just that we haven't really been able to mount the effort to make this happen. And that is not just
part of why we want staff.
Yeah. Not just talking to your legislators during the legislative session, because they're so overwhelmed and so busy, but developing a relationship with your legislator, your House member, your senator throughout the year, and especially during the interim sessions. And those interim committee hearings begin in June, I believe, right? And they go all the way through November, maybe even into December. It's an opportunity to show up, or even if you don't show up, just you can look at those agendas online at nmlegis.gov, see what they're going to be talking about, and show up. I don't know whether they're going to be live. Maybe by June they will be, but they're probably going to continue to have online
Zoom
access.
They did even
as
last
well,
session,
which is great, because then you don't have to drive down to Deming or drive up to Farmington or wherever, because those interim committee hearings are held in various places across the state over those
and part
months.
of what we want to also learn how to do is how do we bring bills to the interim committee, like bill ideas, because one of the things we were told, and we've learned this from a couple of sessions now, is that if you don't have some kind of serious conversation in the interim hearings and you've got a bill that needs funding, good luck. And so where you want to get, legislative support for a bill and earmark funding for the bill. That happens in the interim sessions.
Right. And then that's when they listen to the quote unquote experts about the issues that will become bills. So, maybe we develop a team of experts that can go speak at these interim hearings
Exactly.
to counter most of the quote unquote experts who are from oil and gas and P&M and predatory lenders. And we're apologizing because our dishwasher is running in the background. And so we're hoping that it's not too loud.
It's pretty loud. Anyway.
We're sitting at our dining room table.
Yeah. The other, one of the other lessons we learned is that the constituent Zooms, the constituent legislator Zooms were really impactful, very helpful. They developed relationships with the legislature. These, for the most part, happened before the session. And I think that's something we want to expand and do throughout the year. And in that way, and build the scale of it and the scale of the number of people who get our alerts. It's one thing to have, hundreds of people from Retake contacting their legislators. It'd be nice if it was thousands. And it'd be nice if the conversations with legislators had, like we had here in Santa Fe when we met with eGolf, it was like 80 or 90 people. Right. And so he knows he's got a lot of constituents out there paying attention. And
right.
That makes a difference.
They want to hear from their constituents.
They say they want to hear.
Oh, I think they do.
They're not going to say, I don't really want to hear from you. That'd be a bad plan.
I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. Okay. I think they want to hear. Okay, so some of the other lessons learned. You were going to talk about Senate Judiciary Committee.
I don't want to beat up on Senator Cervantes. He faced an impossible task.
He's chair of the Senate Judiciary.
And Senate Judiciary, when you see the report card, it's like, I think close to a dozen of our bills died in that committee, and not by a vote. None of them by a vote.
They just weren't heard.
They weren't heard. And
in fact, there were over 100 that never got heard, right?
That's what I said. I think
backlog?
It was 100.
Okay.
And I exchanged emails with Senator Cervantes after the session, and he's eager to get together and talk with me. But part of what he said is, he said that's their job, is to really closely vet those bills and make sure that the bill language doesn't say things that it shouldn't. And, so my recommendation is that they go to 5 hearings a week. And in that instead of three, so that they can get through more bills. That's the way the Finance Committee and the House Appropriations Committees meet.
Right, because those committees, almost all the bills have to go to those committees, whereas, Education doesn't hear a lot of bills because they only hear the education bills. Okay, so we are also hoping that the limit, I guess the House limited the number of bills you could introduce to 5 this year. Right. So we hope that continues, and we're recommending that the Senate limit it to 5 per legislator. Then there would be 500 bills instead of 2,000 or 3,000 bills, because there's no way they can get through those bills. There's just not enough time.
Yeah, and the other thing we wanted to do is just figure out the FIR situation, the financial impact reports, and how we can have an influence on that. They invite experts to offer comment on bills, and we'd like to be among those. Roxanne, you wanted to talk a little bit about the committee chairs, but we've only got about a minute. So
committee chairs. We did a Zoom webinar with Joe Monahan. He's a political blogger. He's been doing it for, I think, over 20 years here in New Mexico. So we had him on the other night, and you can watch that conversation on our website at retakeourdemocracy.org under Retake Conversations.
It's in the actions and events menu.
Yeah. And, we asked him about how some people in the legislature, like committee chairs, they have a lot of power. And he said, well, it's their job. They got the seniority. They got into these positions. It's their job to be leaders. You may not always agree with them. So the only way to really change that is, if enough people disagree with them, then you vote them out. And that's just what happened in the last year. We did vote several of those people out. So we can't really complain about them doing their jobs,
Yeah.
but we
Well,
can
we
use the
can't. I do,
elections. We
but
can use the election to make changes.
but we're totally out of time. And so we want to just thank you for listening, and we'll be back next week. And we just want to ask you to continue to wear a mask and social distance. We aren't out of the woods yet, but so stay safe, stay healthy, and stay active.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
We'll be back next week.